Okay, welcome to today's session. Hello and welcome to Understanding Talent Intelligence Grows Up. If you experience technical difficulties, please dial 1-866-779-3239. I repeat, 1-866-779-3239. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. This event is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your speakers for today, Josh Bersin and Kamal Alawalia.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. I'm Kamal, I'm president at Eightfold. And if you're registered and joining this webinar, you and I, we are all fans and we follow Josh very closely. So, Josh, before we get into talent intelligence, how irresistible is the new book? How's it going?
All right, I won't make a big spiel about the book. I signed 900 copies of it in Vegas last week, so my arm is a little tired. The book is great. We're going to hear more about that later. But thank you
Fantastic.
for asking.
No, I have an early copy of it and I'm sure it'll be flying off the shelf. So the date is October 25th.
October 25th. So,
Excellent. So we should start with Halloween and keep giving gifts to each other right
yeah,
through the days.
great.
Fantastic. Hey, your keynote at HR Tech, like last year, lit a fire, and it was a interesting line that you have that by now, after your keynote, everybody will have talent intelligence scotch taped on every booth. So we thought we'll spend more time and actually turn it over to you. Walk us through what you're seeing in the market and how talent intelligence is becoming a foundational piece for the HR world.
Great. Thank you, Kamal. I appreciate you doing this. Okay, well, one thing, I am on a dial-in phone because our internet went down here, so if it's a little hard to hear me, I'll try to talk slowly. So this is a really big topic, and every decade or so, a new domain is created in technology and HR. And this one, what I'm going to do for the next 45 minutes or an hour is I'm going to explain to you what it is, why it is important, and where it came from. And then in a little bit, I'm going to talk about how you do talent intelligence, but we actually have a white paper on how to do talent intelligence. You can get it from Eightfold, and we have it in our research membership also. Well, the context is, of course, you all know this, that for the last 14 years, we've been experiencing this very tumultuous workplace environment, steadily increasing economic growth, pandemic, hybrid work. Now we have high interest rates, inflation, and you would think that in an economy that's growing at this rate, the typical solution is hiring, hiring, hiring. Well, it turns out that's not working anymore because the workforce isn't growing. And there's all sorts of reasons why this is, but the unemployment rate is near all-time lows in most countries, virtually every country. There's some countries where it's a little higher, but it's mostly low because people have stopped having children. They're getting married later. Some people have checked out of the workforce, but the labor participation rate is almost the same as it's always been. It's a little bit lower. The baby boomers are retiring. There's a few of us left who aren't, but some of them are. And yes, the workforce is elongating in size because people are living longer, but the net is that the size of the workforce is not growing. So if the economy grows and the size of the workforce doesn't grow, you got to figure out how to use the people you have better. And you have to, do a better job of managing them because they're willing to move around. And, the thing that I'm working on a pretty big presentation I have to give in Europe on the future of work. And the thing that I've concluded is that in addition to technology and industry changes and economic growth, the thing that's changed the most is mobility. 45%, this basically shows you that by the way, in August of 2022, 4.2 million people voluntarily changed jobs. These numbers are very high. This is going back, you can go back, I don't know how long the BLS database is. It's pretty long. It's never been this high. So roughly a third of the workforce is voluntarily changing jobs because they feel like it, or because they don't like where you're working at your company and they want to go to somebody else's company. And 45% of them are changing industries, which is just staggering. And the reason for that is that we're not, and wages are going up. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you know this is an issue. And of course, the problem with the inflation isn't just that wages are going up, forcing you to invest heavier in the labor force, but also that you create income or wage inequalities inside of your company because the new people coming in are getting more money than the people that have been there 6 months. So you constantly have to look at this and what the impact is on the employee experience. And of course, you've seen a lot of the statistics, and tomorrow there's going to be some new data from Microsoft on this, but most of us are at our limits. We can't do any more work. We're working as hard as we can, as long as we can. We're connected to our computers all the time. We're driving trucks. We're in retail stores. And so the companies we work for are constrained by our human ability to deliver on whatever it is we're supposed to do. Frontline is even worse than white collar. Frontline workers are the most in-demand workers, and that includes nurses, truck drivers, retail workers, salespeople, and so forth, because they're a little bit further away from the corporate story, and they don't get the benefit of the halo of what's going on at the top, so they feel even more disconnected, and contingent work is becoming bigger by the minute. I was just on the phone this morning with Kathi with a tech company that told us that they believe within the next 5 years, 40% of their workforce will be contingent, and they're planning for that. So, and that's because people want to work contingent, but also employers are just going to find people wherever they can, and maybe they just can't find full-time. And I think the big reason for all of this disruption is that we've become really the way we work and the way we recruit has changed. My early career prior to the internet was in the days when you had to mail a resume to get a job. You had to type it on a typewriter, put it in the mail, and cross your fingers that somebody was going to send you a letter back. That was not an easy situation to find a job. And then, of course, we had Monster.com and Career Builder and then LinkedIn. And people said, well, maybe it's not about, my company that defines my career. And by the way, in that original concept, we had integrated talent management, which was called pre-hire to retire, cradle to grave. If you went to work for GE or GM or IBM or whoever it was, you stayed there for most of your career. And if you moved around, you were considered to be a job hopper, and that was considered to be a bad thing. I know you guys don't appreciate this if you're younger than me, but that was true. We had a guy at IBM when I worked there who left IBM to go work for a bank, and we thought he was nuts. I mean, we thought he was crazy. These days, it's very common. So now we've moved to a world where, you look for people based on their experience, the jobs, the projects they've done, and eventually their skills. Because in a workforce like we're in today, you're not going to find that purple squirrel, it's called, who actually has done this job before. Or if you're looking for them, they're probably in pretty high demand, and they may not decide to come work for you. So how do we deal with this? Well, while this workforce stuff has been going on, there's been something else happening. Digital transformation. And, we all know what this is. It's like taking this stuff you do prior to the digital world and digitizing it, right? So having e-commerce, having an app, selling your product online so people can buy it before they show up at the store, multi-channel, omni-channel. And now during the pandemic, and in the first stage of this, it was relatively simple. We just built a website, and then we built apps and all sorts of digital listening devices behind that. But then we had the pandemic. And what the pandemic did is it accelerated it further because everything that we used to do physically had to be done in a disconnected way. So drivers, delivery systems, logistics, supply chains, all got tweaked in the third stage. And what we didn't realize was going to happen was that by the time we went through all this digital transformation of the products and services that we sell, the industry that we were in changed. And so if you now look in the healthcare industry, for example, many of the healthcare providers are being snatched up by retailers. Why are they being snatched up by retailers? Because people are there in the retail stores and they'd like to get healthcare while they're in the store. And the healthcare or the retail companies have really good data about who you are and what you've bought, and they know how to reach you. Whereas hospitals are not very good at that. They don't really have that much information about you until you walk in and you're sick. So Amazon, Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, they're all getting into various forms of healthcare. Energy companies are getting into hydrogen energy and batteries and mining. Automobile companies are getting into digital cars, which gets them into digital maps and so forth. So all of these industries are converging, and what that means is that the jobs that you're hiring for are unfamiliar to you. And, you know, when Walmart came to us, or I think it was Walgreens Boots Alliance came to us and said, hey, do you have any research on how to find pharmacy technicians? I was thinking, am I talking to Walgreens, the drugstore, or am I talking to a healthcare provider? I said, no, we're basically becoming a healthcare provider. So everything you've learned about the roles, jobs, skills, careers, pay, management practices of the current industry you're in, you now have to learn it in the new industry. And that's one of the reasons we started this project called the Global Workforce Intelligence Project, and I'll show you a little bit about it. Of course, in addition to all of that, the way companies are structured and organized has changed. When I was at Deloitte for many years, while I was there, we studied this, you know, transformation from a hierarchy to an agile company. And for most of the years I was there prior to the pandemic, about 75 to 80% of companies said, yeah, we want to be a network and we want to move people around more, but we're not really there yet. So we're really much more on the left than we are on the right. Now everybody's on the right. Every company went through transformations, jobs restructuring during the pandemic, and they woke up and said, hey, I wasn't so bad. Maybe we can do this as a regular part of business. Because what we've learned from the pandemic, my lesson, is what I call the unquenchable resilience of the human spirit. I know that's a little bit too many words, but people adapt. You know, if you give them the right environment, they thrive. In fact, I was listening to Joe Biden's speech today at the UN, if any of you listen to him, or it was a very inspiring speech. One of the things he said was the reason we like democracy is because it frees the energy of the citizenship of the population. That's the way it works in companies. So we want to create a company that allows people to transform themselves into these jobs that you need without waiting for you to tell them what to do. And so reskilling, which was a sideline, kind of nice to have, you know, maybe if we need it, we'll do it, let's send it over to the training department, is everywhere. It's happening all the time. It's essentially a mental state. And the research on reskilling, which I've looked at for years, essentially always surprises me that it is easier to reskill people than you realized. If you know the adjacent skills, you can take a marketing analyst and turn them into a data scientist. You can take a financial auditor and turn them into a cybersecurity auditor. But if you take a nurse and try to turn them into an IT manager, it may not work. You know, that's not too adjacent. So you need to know what these adjacent skills are so that when you decide you need a whole bunch of people in a new role, it's easy for you to figure out who are the right people to move over there, or at least you can give them the right direction instead of running around trying to find people to do these new jobs. So we've done a lot of work on this, and actually one of the studies I did on this several years ago, we found that if you were, this was back in the days when data scientists were hard to find. I think they're a little bit easier to find now, but it was 6 times more expensive to hire a data scientist than it was to train one. 6 times. And we interviewed about 5 or 6 companies to figure this out, because you've got to pay for the recruiter, you've got a bonus, you know, half of them quit after the first 6 months, they need a lot of training, they suck a lot of management time, etc. Whereas if you have somebody in the company who has these adjacent skills, let's move them over there. And so the work you do in skills is very, very strategic. It isn't just improving performance. It isn't just giving people more training. It isn't just making people feel better about their jobs. It's about your company surviving. Because if you can't quickly identify and fill these skills gaps, you're going to get left behind. I mean, just things happen too fast. And I think, you just look at how fast Amazon moves into new industries. A lot of what's going on in there is people stuff. I don't know how good they are at the skilling part, but they hire and give people the opportunity to learn a lot. And the reason for this chart is to show you that it isn't all about the tech. You can buy Eightfold, and Eightfold will show you, and we know this because we've used Eightfold. Eightfold will show you all sorts of things about adjacent skills, but you need to put that into a translated view of what the business wants. If you're Intel and you want to make better chips to compete with NVIDIA, you need to know what are the constellation of skills that are strategic to you. Another chip company like Micron might have a different set of constellation of skills. So there's a lot of opportunity for human development of this strategy. Okay, so all of that's going on. Well, now that we've been becoming very sensitive to skills and skills technology, okay, so let me just answer this question somebody asked about the difference between skill and a competency and a capability, just real quick, because this came up yesterday on something. Let's see, can I go back? Yeah. Competencies are an old-fashioned concept I learned about when I first started as an analyst, where you have a job and some science, social scientist said, well, if you're going to be a salesperson, there's 72 things you need to know. And we're going to write them down, and we're going to call them competencies, and then we're going to have 5 levels of proficiency for each competency, and we're going to use them in our pre-hire assessment, in our promotion, in our development, and our performance management. Nobody ever used that. It's a very useful idea, but it's too complicated. It never was adequately used, and there was no AI, there was no intelligence behind it. It was human beings sitting around talking about stuff and saying, hey, what are the competencies of this job? Skills, the idea of skills was software vendors. It was originally companies like Degree, but software vendors said, and including LinkedIn, can we scrape the history of this person and look at everything this person has done, who they worked for, where they worked, what job titles they had, what courses they took, what city they live in, and can we guess what they might be good at? It's now called inference. Well, yeah, you can. AI is pretty good at that. And so there's all these tools, which I'll show you in a minute, including Eightfold, that actually are pretty good at figuring out, based on a lot of data, what you're probably pretty good at. And then you can inform it, and that's a skill. A capability is my name. I came up with this, is you can't use all these skills strategically unless you sit down as a management team and talk about the capabilities that make your company successful. The capabilities of a nurse in a research hospital are going to be slightly different than the capabilities of a nurse in an inner city, trauma center. There's both nurses, but the things that are important in the research hospital aren't going to be exactly the same as the things that are important in the emergency room and the trauma center. So there's a need for us as HR people and you guys to look at the skills and not just pick them out off a big list and say, hey, look, we got a bunch of skills. What you'll see when you look at the data from skills is some of them are irrelevant. Like if you look at Eightfold data on skills, you get a bunch of things like Microsoft Office. Well, okay, yeah, I guess that's important that people know that, but it's not going to make our company any better to teach everybody about Microsoft Office, so we can forget that. So you need to interpret that. I don't know if that helps. Now, before I get into talent intelligence, what has been happening in skills is all of the vendors are building skills inference engines, and then the ERP vendors are building skills databases. So Workday Skills Cloud is basically a big database. And they're specialized for different purposes. The skills engine that tries to predict what courses you should take isn't the same, and it's not going to have the same insights necessarily as a skills engine that's going to tell you what job you should take or what candidate you should hire. Ideally, this is where Eightfold is so good, because Eightfold is basically a data system that is really one continuum of problems. But the way companies are buying HR software is they're ending up with a lot of skills engines. There's a skills engine in the ERP system. There's a skills engine in the recruiting platform. There's a skills engine in the talent marketplace. And then there's the skills engine in the LXP or the LMS. And what Eightfold has done, and other companies, but Eightfold's one of the leaders, I think, is built a cross-domain skills infrastructure separate from the ERP. Now, it would be nice if this all existed in the ERP, but honestly, the ERP vendors are less sophisticated in their thinking because they are not as involved in the data issues in these individual applications. So that's kind of what's going on. And this is, by the way, this is a complete work in process. Nobody really has this all figured out yet. Lots and lots of companies are working on it. We've got lots of case studies and lots of stories. What I recommend to companies is before you try to do this and boil the ocean for your whole company, focus on the talent needs that are important to your company today. Focus on the roles, the jobs, the problem areas, the new initiatives, and do skills analysis there. And this stuff is moving into a layer of HR tech, which I call talent intelligence, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The idea of talent intelligence is the skills data is really a system of record, but it's not the same kind of system of record as the payroll ERP system of record. It's much more dynamic. It's much more data-driven. It changes all the time, and you want to be able to train it and constantly improve it. It's on different kinds of database technologies, I'll show you, than the traditional transactional systems are. And it's powered by data and AI. So a great skills engine is not just a bunch of software, it's actually a data system with data. And so if you go out and you buy Workday, Oracle, or SAP, and you turn on the skills engine, it doesn't know anything until you put data in it. And you have to put a lot of data in it for a number of years before it gets smart enough about what it may or may not know about your company. Eightfold or a couple other vendors are basically data companies. So I think one of the things with the data intelligence solutions that are coming to market is these are data companies, not just software companies, which is a big, big transformational change in the way we buy tech. So anyway, but why do we do it? What's it all for? So this, by the way, this issue of becoming a data company is not a small issue. Let me give you an example. One of the companies I've worked with for many years is Cornerstone. Cornerstone is the largest LMS company. Most of you probably have it, or many of you do. They went out and bought Edcast 6 months ago. They've acquired Saba. They have all these wonderful learning technologies all brought together into one platform. And for years, they've been promoting the fact that they have more data about learning than any other company in the world. 145 million people or something like that use Cornerstone for something or other. And I asked them the other day, just a week or two ago, well, what are you using that data for? And they couldn't answer it because they hadn't been thinking about it. Not because they couldn't do it. It isn't in their business model. Well, as opposed to a company like Eightfold or Beamery, or to some degree Gloat, where the data is the product. It's not just an add-on, it is the product. So more and more of what you're going to want to do, as I'll show you in Talent Intelligence, is figure out what data is there and where did it come from and what data can we put in. So that's really what's going on. Now, before I get into Talent Intelligence, let me tell you about our experience briefly. About a year ago, we were sitting around in our company talking about the massive numbers of questions we were getting from companies about hiring and skilling, and we felt, the same question over and over and over again. Where do we find people? What are the right skills we need? How do we build adjacencies? How do we build career academies, and so forth? We decided, let's do some work on this. So we poked around looking at data, and we decided to work with Eightfold, because Eightfold is a data company as well as a software company. And what we decided to do is industry by industry study the skills and clusters of jobs in these industries. And I won't get into a lot of this because this is not really the focus of this webinar. We launched all this last week. There's a lot of materials on our website about it. But it's essentially an industry by industry look at the jobs, roles, skills, clusters, and adjacencies to help you get started doing your own talent intelligence. It's very interesting what we learned in healthcare, and this is one we did for banking. And what we basically learned in banking was that about 45% of banks' staff is in the front office, 30% is analytics and product management and product design in the mid office, 15% in IT, 10% in administration. And that's real companies, by the way. This is from real companies. This isn't something we just dreamed up. And, you know, in each of those 4 clusters of jobs, there are roles, there are skills that are increasing and rising in green, skills that are flat, and skills that are decreasing in red. They're not too difficult to understand why some of them are decreasing. But if you look at what they have and where they're going, and compare them to their digital competitors in fintech, they're very different. And so what you can do with a talent intelligence project like this, if you happen to be a bank, and we're going to be launching the banking research later this year, is you can say, well, you know, we want to be like Square or whoever it is that's, you know, kicking our butts. What are they doing that we're not doing? Well, you can actually look at the data and you can figure it out. And you can not just go try to hire people from there, but you can actually see what they're doing differently. And it turned out when we looked at the banking data that these are very different companies. The companies in fintech are 55% IT departments, and the job titles, job roles, job skills are very different than they are in banks. Now, banks have a lot of legacy systems, so they have a lot of skills around the legacy applications. But they've woken up. JP Morgan Chase is spending $1.5 billion to reskill its IT department to build the capabilities it needs to compete in crypto and cyber and digital banking and all the things that are going on in that industry. So, you know, you can look at Chevron doing this for hydrogen energy. You can look at Ford doing it for electric cars and so forth. What if you could do this yourself? You can, and that's what talent intelligence is all about. It's really stitching together these complicated, you know, job-related data sources into a meaningful solution that you can use for planning. And, you know, generally the big thing that's going on in HR is that everything is interconnected now. If you're having a shortage of software engineers, you have a multiples of things going on. You have maybe pay inequities, maybe it's an employee experience thing, maybe it's management development, maybe you need to hire people from the outside, maybe you should hire people from the inside, maybe it's a matter of skilling, maybe they need more development so they're not leaving. You can't just delegate this to talent acquisition and say, hey, go find more people and call me when you're done and here's your job recs. It doesn't work. We were talking to heads of HR in the healthcare industry when we were doing the healthcare study, and some of them said to us, we went and we showed them why there are going to be 2.3 million shortage of nurses in the next 3 years, and they said, well, we're going to triple the number of recruiters we have. And Kathi and I said, well, you know, that's fine, but it's not going to work because there's only 250,000 nurses graduating from nursing school every year. It's just not going to work. You have to think about all 4 of these things together as a completely integrated solution. So talent intelligence is a discipline of bringing together these different data sources to build a skills model and a database that allows you to figure out what to do relative to what we now call the 4 R's. And I'm going to talk about the 4 R's in a minute. What we found in our first version of this research is that when recruiting doesn't work, you need to look at it in a systemic way. It's recruiting, it's retaining, it's reskilling, and it's redesigning. Because in a lot of cases, the reason you need more people is because the job itself is an unproductive job, and maybe we should decompose the job into some work for lower paid people and some work for higher paid people. So the big aha from the Global Workforce Intelligence research is that if you have this kind of data, you can make much better business decisions about how to grow your company than to throwing a bunch of recs out to the recruiting department and crossing your fingers that they're going to find these people and just arming them with as much money as they can, because that doesn't work. Now, let me show you, I'm going to show you some examples of this, but why is this relevant now? It turns out that I think, and you could argue this maybe or maybe not, but I think the reason this is relevant has to do with tech. we actually have access to data in an integrated way that we never had before. My experience in the tech world goes back to the 80s when we had relational databases on mainframes. Then we had multidimensional databases, which were primarily pre-computed intersections between different data. So you could do quick analysis of who bought what product, for example. It used to be, if you wanted to know who bought what product, you had to read a book on SQL, look at the data structure of the database, and then figure out how to write a query and spend a couple of days seeing if the data is even the correct data. Then you got these multidimensional databases in the 1990s, and you could do that with a click of a button. It was like a pivot table. And along came, Google and Facebook and, some of the big internet companies, and they said, well, that's too slow. We now have data about social network data. We have all sorts of user data. We have advertising data. Let's build a massively parallel database, which, by the way, began in the 1980s and 1990s with Teradata, but then moved online with Hadoop. And let's just throw everything in there, and and if it's too slow, we'll just add more servers and more servers and more servers until it's fast enough. And that's what Google did. And it was really proprietary for a long time, and then people started to productize it. So Snowflake, which was one of the highest market cap companies in the tech industry, Google BigQuery, which is the cloud version of this, Platforma, which was acquired by Workday, and other tools, made it possible to take a massive amount of data, put it in a what we now call a data lake, or it's got other names, but and find things out of it. And that's why Eightfold and these other vendors can do this. Under the covers, they're actually manipulating data in a way that we really could not do before. And of course, part of that during the last 6 or 7 years was AI. And I was on the phone yesterday with a vendor that does AI education, and they said that, the AI technologies and algorithms are changing so fast that their instructors are updating their courses almost every week or two. There's so much research and discovery going on in AI that these are now really intelligent systems. You go back to the left, that old IBM Oracle Sybase stuff, it didn't have any intelligence at all. I mean, you had to sit around and program it for days to figure out what was in there. So anyway, that's a little bit of the history of this. I know you guys don't want to hear about tech stuff. And the other reason that I think this has emerged is because we've now spent a good decade figuring out how to do analytics in HR. When I entered the HR domain in the early 2000s, I would go to an analytics conference, and there'd be like 30 geeky IO psychologists or, techies. And most of the time, all we talked about was, how come nobody cares about what we're doing? People didn't really pay attention to it. There really wasn't a lot of sophisticated demand for analytics. Well, that's changed. Every company has a people analytics group. Every company has a data architecture for HR, or at least working on it. The IT departments are involved. We now know that the people data in the company is probably as important as the customer data, maybe more in some cases. And so there's this body of people in the company, in HR, that have statistics degrees, that understand data. A lot of them are working on retention and engagement issues, but they can come along for the ride and work on this talent intelligence stuff, and it's not that hard. I know in my case, when we started doing our work with Eightfold less than a year ago, I didn't know how it was going to go, to be honest. Well, we ended up learning a lot very, very fast. We have one data scientist who came from a bank who worked in HR. We have Kathi, Enderes, who actually has a PhD in math, but she didn't need it. Me, and I'm basically a fly-by-night engineer. We didn't need a machine learning engineer to do this because we had Eightfold under the covers. So this is much easier than you think, and it's not just a dream. It's really something you can do. And it involves not just looking at a bunch of data, but also understanding your company and bringing data into it. In fact, if I look at what some of the talent intelligence practitioners are doing, if you're in an industry like maybe oil and gas or energy, you might want to look at the demand for energy in different parts of the world because it'll affect the talent supply in that part of the world. If you're a financial services company, you might want to look at interest rates. These are all factors that weigh into, what you might want to do for talent intelligence, and it is getting staffed. Usually talent intelligence comes from recruiting. And so the source of the talent intelligence idea was really sourcing intelligence. And a lot of you probably are doing sourcing intelligence with Eightfold or another platform, because what you find from sourcing intelligence is there's a lot of people out there that didn't apply for the job you have and didn't even know that they were a fit, and you didn't know they were a fit. But if you get good at it and you learn the skills and capabilities you need, you can, greatly expand the diversity of your recruiting and the scope and success you're going to have in beating your competition in market to hire the right people. But if you look at the 4 R's, retaining people is all about data, reskilling people is all about data, and redesigning is all about data. So my belief, and our white paper goes through this, is that this set of data and these decisions are going to become more and more strategic over time. Now, the other thing, of course, that's changed is the context for doing this. When I first started as an analyst, maybe in the early 2000s, the big thing in HR was patching together the standalone talent systems and processes in the company. And they used to call it pre-hire to retire. And the idea was, basically this idea, it probably came from GE or older companies where, you would kind of march your way up the pyramid over your career and eventually you would top out, the Peter principle would play, and you would just flatline for a while and then you'd retire. And, everything was great and easy, and we didn't need a lot of analytics because, we just kept feeding the bottom of the pipeline, and then at the top, we just had our various succession processes. Well, this just doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, this is a great picture. I don't know if there's any companies that really operate like this anymore. Everybody's buying, growing, merging, changing. So what we need an intelligence system to help us manage these transformations. This is the chart we developed as part of the first GWI study. And what you see is every talent problem you have, whether it's skills, whether it's leadership development, whether it's recruiting, whether it's performance, whether it's productivity, is going to fall into all 4 of these areas. In the case of healthcare, let me just give you the data. Using the Eightfold database, by the way, one of the things that's interesting about Eightfold is it's a time series database. So you can go into Eightfold, you can say, what does our company look like today? What skills and jobs and roles and clusters do we have? What did it look like last year? I don't know how they do this, it's historic data. What changed? What was the delta? That's kind of an interesting analysis to do. It teaches you a lot about what's happening that you can't tell from the current state. So we did that for 40 or 50 healthcare providers, and what we found is that after talking to a lot of CHROs, was that the most important talent constraint in healthcare is clinical roles, nurses, and various types of nurses and clinical professionals. The turnover rate of nurses can be as high as 60 to 70%. They get burned out. There's a lot of difficult roles in the nursing job. We found a statistic that based on some data that's been done from a survey company, nurses are beaten up or physically abused by either their patients or their peers. Every 2 hours in the United States, a nurse gets hurt. The average age of a nurse is 52 or 53, so many of them kind of want to retire. And there's a huge variation in Glassdoor ratings on how nurses are treated. What we looked at when we looked at the Glassdoor data for the nursing or the healthcare industry, there are healthcare providers that have Glassdoor ratings of 4.1, 4.2, which is sort of in the range of a Google or a Microsoft. There are also healthcare providers that are 2.4, which is like nothing. It's like we're not taking care of them at all. So what we found is that based on the growth of the healthcare market, the demand, the aging population, there will be approximately 2.3 million healthcare workers needed in the United States in the clinical roles. It turned out when we did the analysis that we found that, and again, this didn't take a year. This was a couple of months of just looking at the data, that we were going to be short, that industry is going to be short about 800,000 jobs. The best you can do on recruiting, the best you can do on retaining, the best you can do on reskilling, there would still be 800,000 jobs missing, people missing. And so the industry is going to have to redesign the roles through job decomposition and automation to deal with that 800,000 roles. We had the CHRO of Providence Healthcare come speak at the conference last week, and he described exactly how they're doing this. They're looking at everything a nurse does, and they're trying to find things. By the way, this is done by the nurses, not by HR. What are things we're doing that we don't want to do because they're not really what we call top of license things to do? That upper right box is something you might not even know you need to do if you didn't do this kind of analysis. So, so this is a way of bringing together the disciplines of HR. I mean, if you think about these 4 boxes, talent acquisition is in the lower left, employee experience is in the lower right, learning and development and career management is the upper left, and org design is in the upper right. So these are all domains of HR, but you don't know where to apply them if you haven't done this kind of analysis. Where do you start? So, you know, it would be, you know, people, a lot of times what most companies do, and, you know, I understand this tendency, is they say, okay, let's build the talent intelligence database of our company. Let's get everybody in there and let's look at it. That rarely gets you where you want to go. If you look at what happens in the talent intelligence database, and I've looked at some of these, you kind of don't know where to look because you find out all sorts of things about the company that may or may not be important. So one of the eightfold customers I interviewed is a company in New York, a bank, and he was dealing with, he's in charge of HR for the banking the large part of the IT operations. And he said, basically the problem we have is productivity. We keep having to hire more and more people, and we need to find a way to make people more productive. So he used the talent intelligence database of Eightfold to segment out of all the, I think it's about 50,000 people in this part of the bank, what are the skills clusters we have? Not the job titles. The job titles are almost meaningless because job titles proliferate sort of like flowers. Everybody's got a new title because they just made it up. But what are these people really doing based on their experience and their history and their credentials? And what he found was that in that particular part of the bank, there were 8 or 9 job titles where they were doing the same work with a different title. And he said, these are data analysts. And then he found there were also another 8 or 9 job titles that were working as what we now would call product managers, but they had different titles. And there was another, 10 or 12 job titles that were project managers or program managers. And he learned this from the talent intelligence database. He said, okay, what am I going to do with this information? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get these people together and tell them about each other. And we're going to build what we call capability councils or capability communities where these people can talk to each other. Maybe we want to standardize on some process here. Maybe we want to have to standardize some tools. Maybe we want to standardize some, reward systems, et cetera. We didn't even know we had this opportunity to do this before. So I don't even know if he knew that's what he was going to discover, but he knew that operational efficiency was his goal. So what I, try to tell people in this area is diagnose the problem you want to solve and use talent intelligence as a solution, and you will build a capability to solve more and more problems over time. And this is exactly what happened in people analytics. When people analytics first started, earlier in my career and maybe before I was even doing this, it was IO psychologists doing surveys. And they were, usually doing annual surveys, and they were oftentimes looking at, the general employee sentiment, and then areas of poor management and areas of high turnover that could be used for management development or restructuring or benefits. And that was the only thing they did. But they got really good at data. And after a few years of doing that, they realized, you know, we're actually learning a lot about the culture of our company. And we're beginning to realize that, you know, this group in the company is performing better than that group. And there seems to be a cultural difference between them. So maybe there's a difference in management. One of the companies I interviewed on Talent Analytics a long time ago, People Analytics, was a retailer, and they had a labor relations problem, and there was a union threatening to unionize all of their locations. And they had this analytics group that was doing retention stuff, and the guy who was running it was really smart. He was an ex-Microsoft guy, and he said, you know, before we respond to the labor union, let's look at the data we have in the People Analytics system. And what he found was that in their operations, in their stores, the areas of low employee satisfaction and high turnover were very distinct and very isolated. He found out through correlation analysis what the causation was of those problems. And he went back in the labor relations negotiations and used this data with the unions to show them that they actually do know what the problems are, and they had a very specific diagnosis to solve them, and they actually prevented the union from taking hold. Later, the same data set was used to redesign the stores, because what he then figured out was, now that we know what the high-performing stores look like, let's look at how they operate differently. Let's go visit them. Let's go talk to the managers. Aha, there's a different business model here. And what they did is they ended up redesigning the stores so the jobs, you know, when you go into like a home improvement store and you're looking for a drill, you don't want a guy to just tell you, here's a good drill. What you want him to say is, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to build? Because if he has a consultative, you know, relationship with you, you tell him, well, I'm actually trying to build this big cabinet. He's going to say, well, you don't need a drill. You really need, you know, this router, and you need this wood, and you need this other stuff. And all of a sudden you walked out of there with $5,000 worth of stuff instead of this drill that you don't even know what to use. So anyway, that came out of the beginning of looking at data in this company that actually had nothing to do with even labor relations. So my point is that People Analytics is kind of like a magnet. It will get bigger and bigger and bigger and better, and you'll be able to do more and more with it. And I don't claim to predict all the things you're going to do with it, but generally speaking, the 4 areas that are the most interesting are sourcing is number 1, where you want to get really smart about the skills of your company and where you can find more people like that. The learning and capabilities analysis of what are the skills gaps we have, where are we trending down, where are we trending up, like that banking example. What are the challenges we're going to have next year if we grow at this rate, and where are we going to see gaps? And if so, can we migrate people from this role to this role in a more deterministic way? I'll never forget, I had a meeting with the CHRO of IBM, Diane Gerson, before she retired, and she was telling me about this challenge they had with all these old mainframe people in IBM, and that they were going to have to do a layoff to let them all go. And I was really surprised to hear her say this, because I know, having worked in the mainframe world, that actually those mainframe people are object-oriented programmers. COBOL is an object-oriented language. Now, you know, they're stuck doing old, you know, JCL and whatever it is they're doing, but, you know, if they had, at the time, this was many years ago, had the time or the energy or the data to think about that, they could have immediately said, you know, all those guys over there in mainframe land, they can go work on the IBM cloud. We have exactly the right place to put them. But that's not easy to do if you haven't looked at this kind of data. And then, of course, the People Analytics work is going to be contributing to this too. So as a data person, I think this is huge. The complexity, of course, is that there's a lot of pieces to this. And no company is going to do this in one fell swoop. And, you know, what I really think the best way to sort of grapple with this problem is to start with the problem. What is the thing that your CEO really cares about? So I'll tell you a funny story. Last Friday, I come home from the HR Tech Conference. I get a call from a friend of mine who works in the semiconductor industry. He says, I read your 4R model, and we're going to use it to plan our workforce strategy for the Department of Commerce because of the CHIPS Act, because the CHIPS Act, the $50 billion that the federal government just allocated to the semiconductor industry, didn't really accommodate the issue of human beings and where are they going to come from and who are they going to be. They didn't have time to think about that. So he's working in a consortium with his company and some others to try to figure out what are the jobs and skills we're going to need. Is it going to involve immigration reform? Is it going to involve reskilling? And his CEO asked him to lead this. And once I explained to him what we did and he looked at the Faro model, he said, my God. And within a couple of hours, he had figured out how to apply this domain to his data. And we're going to talk to him about Eightfold, Kamal, and see if they want to use it. I'm sure they do. But so, you know, I can't predict what the problem is in your company, but I think in a couple of conversations, you can figure out what it is. And if you don't do this and your competitors do, you won't see it coming. I generally have found that there's 3 use cases for this. Number one is there's a part of our company that just sucks. It just doesn't, they're not working, they're behind their numbers, they're losing market share, you know, they're losing money, whatever it may be, whether it be a product line, a functional business unit, a geography, whatever. Let's analyze it to death and figure out what's going on there. The second is the Intel example. We want to move into AI-enabled chips. We're going to do it somehow. We need to know how to build that capability. We're a telco. We need to get into 5G. We're an oil company. We need to get into hydrogen, et cetera. The third is, you know, we just merged with another company or maybe multiple companies, and we got to go through a transformation, and we got to figure out what skills we have and where we want to go. All of these are real stories and really happening. Now, our role is to help you. We are, you know, sort of more of a research analyst and advisory company than a consulting company, but we can help you do this. We have done enough of it ourselves. We're going to do it industry by industry, and we are learning how to do it better and better. And this is part of the role of HR. HR is a domain, it's a profession that's not standing still. You can't just pick up a book or read an article and say, oh, Starbucks did so-and-so, let's copy that. It won't work. I mean, Starbucks is going through a whole re-engineering of their whole customer experience and their employee experience. If you read the articles about it, you know, and I doubt Target is going through the same one. You have to use this information to invent what's going to make your company successful. So that's number one. The second is stitching these things together. It's easy enough for me to build this slide. Actually, it wasn't that easy to build the slide, but I did build it. But doing it is not easy. And we're going to be doing some work on operating models we'll show you next year. But, you know, if you don't have good data, it's hard for you to argue that this job should be filled internally instead of externally. I was at a bank right before the pandemic. It was a really interesting meeting. They invited me to come to their offsite. And you had the head of talent acquisition and the head of succession management and leadership development fighting with each other about stealing people from different parts of the organization. The head of succession saying to the head of talent acquisition, why do you keep stealing people from my pipeline to bring them into these new jobs? That obviously shouldn't be happening. They should be talking to each other on a regular basis. So this kind of data will help you build these interconnected relationships between the different parts of HR so your company can reinvent itself on a more regular basis. So I would encourage you to join us in this crusade. We have this great white paper that talks about this. The new research report, which I don't have a picture of here, is called the Talent Intelligence Primer, I believe is what we called it. You can get it from Eightfold, you can get it from us if you're a research member. And of course, we're happy to talk to you about any questions. Sorry I went so long, but we have 5 more minutes. So if there's any questions, let's open it up.
Josh, I addressed some of them, but there's a very good one that just came up from Steven Spencer. What kind of skills would one need to be a talent intelligence manager within HR?
You know, we actually looked at that. I looked at those jobs that I mentioned earlier. I think it's a combination of being a good data analyst and feeling comfortable. You don't have to be a data scientist, but being comfortable with analyzing data, you know, and seeing the forest for the trees, and really knowing the business you're in. It is hard for an external analyst to come into your company and look at the data and tell you where the action is. What we found in the healthcare research is we got a ream of healthcare data, and we looked at it. We were poking around in there. We're thinking, oh, look, they're hiring a bunch of IT people. Oh, they're hiring a bunch of logistics people. Oh, there's a whole bunch of jobs in trucking and outsourcing of nursing. We had to talk to the CHROs to get us pointed in the right direction. So I think a lot of these people are going to come out of sourcing analytics. They're going to come out of people analytics, and they're going to be people who have consultative backgrounds and really have a good understanding of the business itself. The tools are so sophisticated. Learning how to use Eightfold isn't like learning how to use a Teradata. I mean, you just ask it questions and it gives you answers. So you don't have to be an expert on the tech to do this well.
Another question from Allison. Josh, have you heard about Gartner's new definition of career well-being? And what are your thoughts on that playing into today's topic?
I don't know I'm not sure exactly what they're referring to, but I could guess that, and this is a little bit about what's going to come out tomorrow from Microsoft. The existential common issue in the workforce today is this issue of burnout. And, 81% of people say they're burnt out. The way to prevent burnout is to give someone a path out of it. Give them the skills, the direction, the goals, the motivation, the aspiration to do more with their career. And that's, talent intelligence will help with that because, my daughter, for example, is a marketing director at a company, and she really likes data. And she's always worried to herself, should I become a data scientist? But I kind of like marketing. Well, those, there's adjacencies there, but it's not the same job. And if you have that kind of information and you can share it with your employees through a talent marketplace like a lot of these vendors have, that will give people a lot of sense of energy about their career. So I'm not exactly sure what the Gartner definition is, but I think that might be what it's about.
I'm surprised you don't follow Gartner closely.
They're
Or
kind
maybe
of
they follow you
they're
closely.
sort of our arch rival, Kamal.
Another question is from Mohammed. What's next gen talent management strategy? I think you touched upon some of it, but if you want to expand on that.
The simple idea is that you need to create a variety of journeys for employees inside of the company, depending on their aspirations, needs, skills, and the needs of the business. The original talent management process, that little pyramid I showed you, was based on this up-or-out model where we kind of knew where the company was going and we kind of knew what good skills we needed so we could move people into those roles over time. Now it's a mixture between, on the one side, the employees explaining what they want to do with their lives and knowing a lot about their capabilities and where they want to go, and then the company giving them direction. The talent marketplace technology does this. One of the reasons talent marketplace tools are so successful is they do match those two things together. And I think the future of talent management will look more like the talent marketplace and less like a pre-hire to retire workflow.
Yeah, plus performance management is also up in the air and needs to be rethought
With
of.
performance management, and then the question you have to answer is, how do we do performance management when people are doing multiple jobs or they're working on multiple projects? So There's a lot of work going on there.
Yep. Okay, last question. We have several actually. We can follow up separately. Bob has a good question. What about team analytics? Everyone seems to focus on individuals with respect to people analytics and talent intelligence. So people work in teams. So he's curious about intelligence around team dynamics and success criteria.
I agree with you. It's a huge area of research. You know the research Google did on this. Deloitte did research on effective teams and what makes successful teams. I think you could apply some of the tools of the talent intelligence software to that and look at the high-performing teams in your company. There's a guy, Michael Arena, if you know Michael, I think he's at Amazon now, and he studied team effectiveness at GM. And one of the belief systems they had at GM was that the most successful teams were the most tenured people, the people with the most experience, the people that had the deepest skills, and those people were put on the most important teams. And what his research basically found that was half true, that actually the whole truth was that the most successful teams in product also knew all of the systems and aspects of GM, so they would never reinvent the wheel. They would take advantage of things in GM that they knew about that other people may not know. So if you're a domain expert in one area, you may not know everything from retail to distribution to manufacturing to supply chain. So he concluded they came up with a team model that broad understanding of the way the GM company works is just as important as deep domain in the disciplines of the designs or the projects that you're working on. So I think it's a great question and something every company could, really do on their own.
Great. So we're a little over time. So Janet, I'll get your question to Josh and we'll get that answered as well. But thank you so much, Josh. Always good to hear from you, and there's always something new to learn. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Kamal. Bye, everybody.
And that concludes today's meeting. Please feel free to disconnect.